Hello. We are going to talk about the vampire lovers this week. This is our 5th video and our 4th country represented. We've done United States, we've done Germany, we've done Italy, and today we're going to hit up the United Kingdom. So this is a Hammer film. It's our first Hammer film. Hammer Film Productions, they were making movies from the 1930s through the 1970s. They started really breaking into horror in the 1950s, and they were the first company to start putting horror out in color. So that's a pretty big deal. They went through 1979 technically, but they only put out 2 movies after 1974, one in 76, one in 79. The Vampire Lovers here features Peter Cushing, who almost everyone knows from Star Wars. But in this movie, Peter Cushing is a general, and his daughter gets seduced by a vampire. Now, this movie is based off the story of Carmilla. I think when most people think of vampires, they think of Dracula. And some people may think that Dracula is the original vampire story. But Dracula came out in 1897, which is a long time ago. The story of Carmilla came out 26 years before that in 1871. This was a British story set in the Holy Roman Empire. Yes, we have the same setting here as we did for Mark of the Devil, also known as Witchers Tortured Till They Bleed, my preferred title for it. We talked about that a few weeks ago. So you may recognize this map. We talked about it that week. And this is a map of the Holy Roman Empire as it was in the late 1700s, early 1800s. This story of Carmilla takes place in the early 1800s. Mark of the Devil took place in Austria, here. And our story today, Carmilla, or Vampire Lovers, takes place in Styria, here. So, very close. These two stories take place very closely. The 2 movies have a very similar aesthetic, same time period, same area, and actually, the reason why the story takes place there and not in England, since it was written by a British person, is that the beginning of vampire superstition, as far as I could tell, is traced back to the Holy Roman Empire and the Ottoman Empire, which is right over here. So between Austria, Styria, and Serbia, which is at this time part of the Ottoman Empire, people were getting really worried about vampires. And in real life, people started digging up graves and staking the bodies through the heart so that they wouldn't come back. If I'm not mistaken, I believe, there would be some kind of sickness, or like a child in the village would die, and then people started blaming vampires, so they started digging up dead bodies. So about 100 years after that, this story takes place, and it was written about 50 years after it takes place. So even for the time, 1871, it was set in the past. So, what's going on in this movie? We have Carmilla, who is a female vampire, and she shows up and she seduces women. So, it's not too different from Dracula, except it's all lesbians. So we have Carmilla, who goes by various names in the movie. First she is Marcilla, then she's Carmilla, and then later she's Mircalla. But she shows up, she finds a hot young lady in Austria, the Austrian section of the Holy Roman Empire, and she starts hanging out with her, and it's like they're just friends, and then they start to have sexual encounters, and then the girl becomes sick. And so this is like a pattern throughout the movie. Well, eventually she shacks up with Peter Cushing's daughter, and Peter Cushing is a general, a war general, and basically, even though he's not a likable character, you kind of have to decide, if you're going to root for the vampire who's killing off these girls, or you're going to root for the brutish, tyrannical general father whose daughter is in love with the vampire, but is also being consumed by her. So the story is pretty simple. There's a lot of lesbian sex scenes, which I'm sure is very interesting for many people. And I think at the time, 1970, when this came out, I think that was pretty shocking for the time period. I don't think there were very many lesbian scenes out there with full nudity, with both women kissing and stuff like that. So it was probably pretty shocking on that end of it. But as far as the violence goes, we get some pretty good violence at the beginning and at the end. It's rather satisfying. There are some beheadings. But the middle of it is mainly all plot, you could say. Not bad, but not super exciting, because you're kind of waiting for later. I would give this a 6 out of 10. It is the first movie in a trilogy, and I have seen all three, but both of the second and the third movie came out in 1971. So we'll be talking about those later after we finish 1970. I will say one of the sequels is more fun than this one, and one of them, I would say, is very boring. So the trilogy itself is all right. It came at the end of the Hammer legacy. I would say this is worth a watch. It's historically interesting. And that's pretty much... Oh, I do want to talk about the poster here. Okay. The poster looks super awesome. We have this woman, this vampire, has imprisoned a whole bunch of men and women, and there's all these vampires over here, and they're all torturing these men and women. We've got these taglines: not for the mentally immature, if you dare, taste the deadly passion of the blood nymphs. If the movie was like this, it would have been awesome. There's only one vampire in the movie, not multiple. And the vampire in this movie does not torture anyone in a dungeon. The dungeon looks cool. She doesn't go after any men in the movie. It's only women. And it's one at a time. So this scene right here is cooler than the movie. We even have like a cool mace down here. Bats, skulls, torches, all that. We don't really get any of that in the movie. So that's a little bit disappointing. Hopefully they got some people into the movie with this poster, drew them in. But overall, the movie is decent. The story is cool. I really appreciate the fact that the story is older than Dracula, but it's not one of the most exciting movies I've ever seen. So check it out if you want. I think the best part about it is that it leads to a great sequel, and the sequel is absolutely worth watching. So we'll talk about that one more later. For now, take care.